So it seems that Warhammer 40k's next major balance patch is coming early. Let's talk about the next balance data slate that's due out next week. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today I thought we'd focus on the next balance patch that's coming for Warhammer 40k and what Games Workshop might choose to do in the next balance data slate. As we talked about in the video the other day, it's my opinion that 40k's current game balance is about as bad as it's been for really quite a long time. So I think it's a pretty good decision by Games Workshop to get this patch out a bit early and hopefully make competitive games of 40k that bit more interesting, rather than having to wait months for changes for something that we know is almost inevitably going to be coming at some stage. So the next Balance Dataslate was announced fairly casually in a recent MetaWatch article over on Warhammer Community. It was one that focused on Adepticon in particular, and talked about a Harlequins versus Harlequins mirror match in the final, two very similar lists, and gave a few of the reasons why they seem to be dominating the competitive scene at the moment. We went through a bit of that the other day. Most codexes do seem pretty strong on their release in 9th edition, but Harlequins exceptionally so. They gave us a few reasons as to why they think they're powerful, and also some thoughts on counters, which we'll get onto in just a second, as it did amuse me just a little bit. The data slate is going to be coming next week at some stage, no idea exactly when yet, but we'll certainly do a breakdown in full here on Warspets Tactics, so feel free to subscribe if you'd like to see that. Of course, they were a bit cagey on details before an official release, but apparently Harlequins will be getting fixes and tweaks that they say aims to make the game both fun for the Harlequins player, but also their opponents. Hopefully they'll do a bit of other stuff as well, as we'll get onto in a second. Just as a quick aside for the article though, I did quite enjoy Games Workshop's rather optimistic approach to countering Harlequins, basically stating things like autocannon equivalents, heavy bolters with strength 5 and multi-damage, and mortal wounds. All of those could help out against most of their units, in particular their fearsome Void Weavers, arguably one of the more undercosted units in the game. To be fair, it's all really quite sensible advice. They are the damage profiles that will hurt their units the best, but I did find it just a bit amusing that they happened to show Imperial Guard with those weapons, lining up a Hydra and a Wyvern to try and deal some damage to Harlequins. Just an interesting juxtaposition when you appear to be directly comparing one of the weakest factions in the entire game of 40k to the very strongest. Some guy on the competitive 40k Reddit page did a rather interesting little math hammer breakdown, which I will link in the video description, and basically compared the damage output of a few guard units to the equivalent damage back in Void Weavers, maybe the Hydra being one of the best examples, seeing as it was actually pictured right here, and theoretically should be really good at killing Void Weavers. The damage profile is pretty much ideal, and it also gets the +1 to hit for targeting fly units with those autocannons. One Hydra for 110 points does do some decent damage to Void Weavers, admittedly. It kills about 55 points of them, so around about 50% of its own points cost when you've taken into account both the autocannons and heavy bolters. The thing is though that when Void Weavers strike back, 90 points of them kill around 69 points worth of Hydras, which as well as being a very funny number in and of itself, it also adds up to about 76% of their own points cost, so Void Weavers are basically about 50% more efficient than one of their direct counter units. All things being equal, they should happily gun Hydras off the table even if they were right in the open, never mind the fact that they have a vastly better move characteristic, a crazy 22-inch movement and fly in light, and if they want to truly make sure they're winning the fight, they can also fire and fade for a stratagem. Again, I'm really not saying it's bad advice to spam stuff that wounds on a 3+ and is fairly low AP. It was just a bit of an unfortunate choice of picture along with the article, I thought. In any case, we've seen a couple of these balanced data slates now, so it's possible that we might see a few predictions as to what they might be able to do. The first one that came out I really liked quite a lot, added some really quite fun and thematic buffs to Guard, Chaos and Necrons, and to tone down a couple of the stronger armies in Admech and Drakari. For Harlequins, I feel like the Void Weavers are pretty much guaranteed to get a nerf. It feels like the sort of unit that are just plain undercosted. I think they could just do with rising a small amount, and I guess they might also think about using a rule to stop you spamming 9 of them. After all, that was what befell Orc Buggies when they felt that they were too efficient and people were just going overboard on them. I wouldn't be too surprised to see Harlequin troops go up a point or two. I feel like they'd be really efficient and interesting units still, even if they were 14 or 15 points, maybe just with a bit more emphasis about making the best use of their sneaky tricks, and a bit less spammable for what's supposed to be a fairly precious Eldar resource. Finally, I'm going to guess that in some way they might make some changes to the Sadath of Light. Its main trait and its stratagem are both incredibly strong indeed. Maybe even if they just toned down one other aspect of it, then it might see a bit more competition from Dark and Twilight as well, both of which remain good and interesting, but they're just a bit overshadowed right now. Otherwise, before the Harlequins burst onto the scene, it really was Tau and Custodes stomping the rest of the meta flat, with over 50% of big tournament wins between the two factions. I really wouldn't be too surprised if Games Workshop took the opportunity to tone down a few units there. For Tau, I feel like crisis suits are probably in the firing line. When a unit gets so good that you can basically field loads of it and basically very little else from the codex, I think that Games Workshop typically tends to limit that a bit. I feel like maybe a 5-point increase wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, and make other options a bit more tempting. Broadsides are just ridiculously efficient firepower too. Again, I think they could probably keep them fairly intact and give them a small points nerf, but we might just be adding broadsides to the long list of units that got a very overpowered unit when the codex dropped. It had the core keyword despite being really threatening, and then Games Workshop casually removed the core keyword to break some of its main synergies. It happened for the Admech Iron Striders and Drakari Talos. I would not be surprised if it happens to them. Otherwise, while Tau do need to have good shooting as it's basically all that they do, I feel like they're quite likely to take some hits to their ignores line of sight weapons. Airbursting fragmentation launchers and smart missiles can just hoover up really quite a lot of factions' infantry that's desperately trying to hide out of line of sight. Ignore's line of sight is really powerful in 9th edition, and I don't think it would be the worst thing to put a bit more of a premium on it. Again, you could potentially do points nerfs on those particular units, or maybe make them interact worse with marker lights, maybe just be a couple of weapons that you can't use marker lights on or something. Only ideas there, of course, but I feel like that could be something else that Games Workshop targets. And just with a few limited nerfs, I still think that Tau will remain very strong and a bit more interesting to play against. For the Custodes, I kind of feel like they could just literally go back to the pre-chapter approved points, and that would already be an improvement. Maybe let everyone keep their free Misericordias just for the sake of simplicity, but when the Virtus Praetors and Trajan Valoris randomly lost a fair few points, it just seemed like a weird case of Games Workshop buffing units that were already some of the strongest in the whole game. Otherwise, the vast majority of Custodes lists do seem to still be using the Emperor's Chosen Shield Company. I guess that could be another target for rules nerfs in some way, though I'm not sure exactly what sort of tack they might take. Finally, at least for the first Balance Dataslate, they really went quite heavy on buffing the weaker factions in the game. Out of these, I'd guess probably nothing will be coming for either Knights or Chaos Marines. Both of those are hopefully going to be getting 9th edition codexes in the not too distant future, so I wouldn't be too surprised if Games Workshop doesn't mess with them further in the short term, not when hopefully they do have some improvements coming on the way. It at least sounds like Guards and Demons might be getting their codex after Chaos Marines, both of which will be very nice for a bit of a helping hand. Guards buffs with a 2+ save Lehman Ross were quite useful, but the order things fell a bit flat and didn't really alter things that much in my opinion. I feel like some other interesting army special rules could be fun to throw into the mix. Kind of hard to say what else they might layer on them though. Really, they do need a new codex. It's a similar sort of thing with the demons. For some reason they got absolutely no changes in the previous Balance Dataslate. A few of their builds can be quite strong, but the vast majority of the codex is kind of underwhelming. I think they could easily hand out a little faction-specific buff for each one of the god-specific factions, and it wouldn't be too much. Maybe Khorne Demons could all get an extra attack on the charge or something, or Tzeentch ones could add in a 6-up Feel No Pain perhaps. Death Guard and Sisters I think are arguably some of the most struggling factions out of the 9th edition codexes. For both of these, I think if Games Workshop's doing the brave decision, then I'd probably just go for reversing their chapter-approved points nerfs. I feel like both of their nerfs were kind of reacting to a meta that had long passed. Certainly I feel that Death Guard were given a really raw deal, and before all their nerfs I think they were a fairly well balanced faction versus most of the rest. Giving Plague Marines either a small points cut or an extra ability or so might be really quite nice as well I think. They've just been a little bit subpar ever since the codex dropped. Finally, I wouldn't be entirely surprised if Space Marines saw a tweak or two if they are doing widespread buffs. We've had rumours of a new Space Marine codex out sometime later in the year. Usually that means all manner of army special rules, so there's every chance they might introduce one of those in a minor way. Maybe in a similar sort of way to how they gave them Shock Assault and Bolter Discipline early in the codex that came out in 8th edition. I don't think that they really need as much help though as Guard or Demons, or the other factions that are still waiting 9th dexes. In any case, I'm looking forward to seeing what Games Workshop come out with. I think the previous Balance Dataslates have been really well done thus far, much better at reacting to the current meta rather than one that they've had to send to the printers 6 months ago as with chapter approved, and I feel like we'll get a fair few good steps in the right direction, maybe even with a few fun extra rules for some factions if we're lucky. Let me know what you think might be coming or what you'd most like to see in the Balance Dataslate down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. I'll certainly be covering that Balanced Dataslate in a similar style when it drops, so check back later if you'd like to see that. Finally, if you have been enjoying my videos on the channel, I'd just like to quickly mention one way in which you can help keep them coming if you'd like to, and that's the channel Patreon page, links down in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and also automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some really big model kits each month, the Chaos Knights box set being the next giveaway. That's links down in the video description. If you're interested at all, feel free to check it out. In any case, an absolutely enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.